Okay, we should be recording. So, like I said, if you haven't had a chance to, as you guys come in, please fill out the attendance form. It helps us keep track of who is there and who is not, so we can just keep track of how many people are coming. And if you have not done so already, please join us on Slack. The link right there is softwaresaturdays.slack.com. In the Slack, you'll find a link to all these slides. So if you want to follow along on your own, they are in the #fall 2020 web dev chat. Okay, so I hope everyone's doing good today. So like I said, today is Software Saturdays, Lesson 1, HTML and CSS. So this week will be a pretty, not too much complicated material. We're just going to go over the basics of HTML, CSS, what each of them are, and how to use them in a website. This is extremely important because all web pages are built off of HTML, and having a way to code these web pages down, it makes it really easy to do React, because React is nothing more than doing HTML but in JavaScript, another kind of web-based programming language. All right, so like I said, if you were not here at the info session last week, here is the schedule for this semester. We have 7 sessions scheduled. Of these 7 sessions, 5 will be project sessions and 2 will be a project days. So the first 5, as you can see here, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, JSX, and then React for 2 weeks. And then we'll have 2 project days. You will not have to attend both project days, but we do ask you to attend at least one of them, so you guys can hear the requirements for the project and work on it in class and get some, get the best chance to finish it by the time the semester ends. Cool. And then some other resources we have available to everybody. Weekly learning sessions. Obviously, everyone's here at 30:30. This is what will happen, like I said, for the next 7 weeks, so keep that on your calendars. We also will be recording these sessions, so you should be kind of seeing that right now. And I'll try to post these every Sunday, but we'll see. They might be coming out today, might be out tomorrow. I'm not sure exactly when. And I'll send out the link to the YouTube channel to be posted on in the Slack and via email, so that everyone can go back and review these if they do need to. The attendance link, yes. So let me quickly copy the attendance link again. It's in the Slack as well. It's in these slides, which are on the Slack, if you do need to go and reference them again. And if you're just coming back, please fill out the attendance link so that we can keep track of who is coming and who wasn't here, essentially. Cool. So before we begin, I just wanted to get a quick poll from everybody here. Does everyone have some sort of text editor available on their computer that they're using right now? Send me in the chat. You can use the little yes icon in the participants window. I just kind of want to know, do people have a text editor that they can use? And if not, I do recommend Visual Studio Code, one of my favorite text editors. A link to it can be found right here. I see a couple of yeses. Nice. Okay, yeah, ID text editor works. So Visual Studio Code is very popular. Atom, Notepad++. If you want to like a terminal one like Vim or Emacs, that works as well. Sorry. Like I said, if you don't have one, you can follow the link right here, code@visualstudio.com, and that will take you to download VS Code. You will need this because all of our files will be edited in some sort of text editor, like VS Code or Atom or Notepad++ or whatever is up to you. And having one available will make it significantly easier for you to actually edit these files and test them out on your own. Second, we have a GitHub. If you're familiar with GitHub, here's a link to it. If you're not too familiar with it, you can still follow that link and just look at the files that are listed right there. These will change, the repository will be updated weekly with the demos for each week. So if you want to go back and reference the demo, that is a link to find all of that stuff. You will find 3 demos in there. We'll go through all 3 over the course of these next couple hours or so. Excuse me. That's how we will keep all of our major code, you could say, for this learning session. All right, so with all that out of the way, it's time to begin class. So first, we're talking about HTML. So could I just get a quick poll? How many people have heard of HTML before? You can use, like, again, the yes or the no's, or you can use, put in the chat if you prefer. Okay, it looks like people are familiar. All right, looks like there's I would say, okay, looks like people have definitely worked with it. Yes, they know what it is. Perfect, cool. So let's just go over to make sure everyone knows what HTML is. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, hence the HTML in HTML. And HTML uses the idea of what are called quote-unquote tags to represent every element on a website. And these tags are basically kind of like defining the looks of different, the layout, the look, stuff like that. And they're going to have an open angle bracket and then a closed angle bracket, as you can see right there. And we'll go over again how to write that in a second. HTML, like I said before, defines the style, location, and the content of every website. So again, every website on the entire web needs HTML. It's how we, as a computer, can convert these what we programmers want to what the user can see. HTML can also use what's called CSS to add styling and formatting, like colors, fonts, borders, margins, and much, much more. And that will be the second thing we go over today. And then finally, next week is going to be JavaScript. HTML can add JavaScript to websites to add functionality, to add dynamic interactions, to add animations, to add a whole bunch of cool different things. And again, that's going to be for next week. So don't worry about that too much right now. So here's some basic HTML syntax. The first thing you'll see here on the left is kind of like the basic layout of an HTML page. And on the right, I go through line by line and kind of tell you what each line is doing. I put these little lines here. You can probably see these like little lines on each side to kind of give you the idea that what are called element tags, because anything between those angle brackets are grouped together to form some kind of document structure. So the very first line says angle bracket, exclamation point, Doctype Html. This is actually what the web browser looks for. It must be the very first line of your HTML file, so that the web browser can actually know that it's looking at an HTML file to be rendered in the web browser. So you must have it. It's also case insensitive. So you can have it whatever capital, you can have it lowercase Doctype, capital HTML, a combo of both. As long as it's there, that's all that matters. Next, you'll see the angle bracket HTML at the very bottom, the angle bracket with a little slash next to it, HTML. That starts the HTML code. So line 1 kind of tells the computer we're looking for an HTML file. And the line 2 actually defines the start of the code for the web browser. So then everything we're going to write is going to be in between these two HTML tags. Now, if you're familiar with the idea of like XML or like parents and like child, like anything, you can consider the HTML to be like the parent tag. Everything in an HTML page or code has to go between the HTML tags. And for those of us who are just joining in, I'm going to put a link in the chat for an attendance form. If you guys could please fill it out so we can keep track of who's here, so we can count how many people come to each session, that would be great. Thank you so much for doing that. I'll keep pushing that in the middle there. Yeah, so next after HTML comes head. Head, as you can see here, lines 3 and 4 are basically different like directives, code, or like options that the browser needs to function properly. You will not modify this section basically a whole lot. We'll do one small thing with this, but overall, this is going to be pretty much we'll give it to you because there's not much you guys need to do from this section. And the last part of a basic HTML page is the body tags. Body tags are how we display everything in HTML. So every piece of code we're going to write will be displayed in between the body tags. That is all the elements that we want to display will go inside of the body tags. Are there any questions so far? If you have questions, you can put them in the chat or hold on to them because we will go into breakout rooms towards the end. You guys can work on some of the practice problems we have for you guys today. Otherwise, you can put them in the chat and I'll get to answer them as I see them roll. All right. So in between the body tags, you're going to see a whole bunch of different tags that look at like a real HTML page. And a couple of these are going to be kind of important for us. Some of them won't be too important for us. But these are kind of like the most basic HTML tags. So like I said, body, all of our code goes in between each of the body tags. Excuse me. And again, this is going to be where all of our code lives to display for the web browser. Next is div. Div is kind of a weird one. Divs are basically used as big grouping elements. They're going to be in the code. They're going to group elements together to look like nice cohesive blocks of like different elements. But you as a viewer will never actually see a div. The reason we use divs is to basically kind of like create sections and then divide elements apart so that we can have some kind of like grouping structure to our HTML code. So divs are kind of very powerful, but they're also very dangerous because it's very much possible to basically what's called layer divs. Add a div within a div within a div, and like have way too many things to keep track of. So when you're designing a website and thinking about the code to write it, be mindful of where you put your div tags and keep track of how many you have. A good text editor will like help catch stuff that, you know, like it's like a missing div tag somewhere. But if you haven't worked with them before, it can be a bit tricky. H1, that's your heading. Very big, you know, very large section headers, kind of define different like sections of text in the web page, kind of like a title almost. And the next is a paragraph tag. Paragraph tag is a paragraph of text, kind of self-explanatory in that regard. And one thing that's not on the slide, but I do want to briefly mention, H1, the one after H just defines the size. The larger the number, counterintuitively, the smaller the text. So H1 is kind of like the super big, I'll show you an example of it, large text. Whereas like H2 or H3 or H4 will be progressively smaller. So you can create like subheadings and subtitles and stuff like that in your HTML code. So let's go over some quick demo one. We open up Visual Studio Code here with some example code. So demo one, if you look at the GitHub, it'll be there as well. This is my basic HTML web page. As you can see, the very first line says !Doctype Html. Again, we need this to define an HTML, define that the web browser is looking for HTML code. Next is HTML. So again, like a parent tag, everything has to go in between the HTML tag. Hence why our file starts and then stops with this HTML. The head tag, again, has stuff for the web browser. Right now, we're keeping a blank because there's not much to put in this. We'll go over some options you can add to it this week and then next week as we go into Get and JavaScript some more. And then again, the body tag. The body is the major one that we're going to worry about because this is where all of our code gets to live. So you can see here, I have an H1 tag with some text, a div tag to kind of group these paragraphs together. Then finally, I have two paragraph tags. So what it will look like if you open up a web browser. Let me open up, that's the wrong one, my bad. This is here. Here is kind of like an example, demo one. So you can see here is kind of like the H1 tag I mentioned earlier. Here is a paragraph tag, and then here's the other paragraph tag. If you remember that from the code, let me bring it up. This div tag was kind of surrounding both paragraph tags. But if we go to the actual web page on here, you will see that there's no div tag anywhere. You can't see quote unquote the div tag. Where can you find the demo code? Okay, so if you need the GitHub link, the link is on, I believe, slide 3 or 4 if you're on the Slack inside lesson 1. Otherwise, I can quickly post it for you guys. Again, it'll be on every slide, so you don't have to worry about not always having it. Let me copy that. So here's the GitHub link with the code. So, are there any questions so far with HTML, like basic HTML? Okay, I don't see it right now. That's good. Yeah, this won't be too long of a session, I don't think. So, you know. And then here, I have time to go over a couple more HTML tags. B, just bold text you put in between it. I italicize the text in between it. Button, we'll create a button. And then A will have a link to another web page. These are very useful. Excuse me. These are very useful. You will definitely be using button and A quite a bit inside of both React and like all of like our web dev stuff, and in general, because having hyperlinks to different things and making like user interactable buttons is very important. So remember the head tag I mentioned earlier from like 10 seconds ago? Like I said, we won't really do a whole lot with there. We'll give you the stuff to put in there normally, because a lot of it is like browser properties like view height and view width and like type or like text encoding and a whole bunch of stuff that isn't super important for us. However, the one super important thing about it is the title tag. So H1, if you can think of it, is like this really big text section heading for the actual like paragraph structure of our content in the web page. You can kind of consider title to be the title bar. So if you look at any kind of web browser, look at the top of your tab. It's going to say like something. For example, our Slack says Slack vertical brace something channel, you know, vertical brace statistics. The way you change the title is with the title tag you see here. And I'll go over an example of that in a second. That will be the one of the only important tags you go over. There'll be one more tag we'll discuss, but overall, the stuff in between head is mostly for the browser and not under the scope of this course. So quickly we'll go over demo 2. So demo 2, here's my demo 2. As you'll see here, the first thing is Doctype Html. Again, every HTML file uses that. I'm going to keep repeating this. And then HTML, like I said, every piece of HTML code goes in between those two tags. And then here's that head tag again. But this time you'll see there is a title. And now if you open this up in a web browser, you will see the very top of the tab will say Lesson 1 Demo 2. And the body tag will give a whole bunch of different things. So one more H1 tag. If we wanted to, we could make it a smaller, like an H2 tag, to practice with better H3, so let's put an H2. And again, we can change the tag, both the opening tag here and the closing tag here have to be the same. So we'll put H2 here as well. I'll save this. Next, some paragraph tags. Here, I'm going to see if we can bold this. This is the word bold here, obviously. Here, we're going to try to italicize this. Here, we're going to make a link. And then finally, we're going to make a button. The important thing to know with the link tags, so this A tag, I don't know exactly why it's called an A tag, so I can't answer my question if you have it, but I can tell you there are two things you have to know about it. One is, honestly, you have to have an A here and an A here. Very important, honestly. The second thing is inside of the A, this is opening A tag. So you'll see here, here's the opening A tag. Again, there's no slash A at the end here. You can see this href equals, and then put in quotation marks, Purdue.edu. What this is telling you is href is kind of telling us where the hyperlink is, or what the hyperlink is for the web page we want to link to. So when I click on the button of this little text that says the word link, I want it to take us to Purdue.edu, for example. All the text in between these two tags, so between this opening A, this closing A, is what the browser will show. The blue hyperlink text we're all very familiar with. It's blue with underline, we've seen it before. And when we click on it, the link that we go to is defined by href. So if you find the button, you can see here at the bottom. So if I go to my web browser again, I'll do this here. I'll open up my demo2 file. First thing to notice, this is demo lesson 1, demo 2. That is the title that we used at the very top of this head tag in between these titles. So that's why the title tag is extremely important. Next, we have this H1 tag. However, we changed it to an H2 tag. So now if I refresh this page, we should see it's going to be decreased to a bit of a smaller size. Because again, the larger the number after the H, like the heading tag, the counterintuitively, the smaller the actual text. Then we have some P tags again, and you'll see that they have this kind of stabbing student. So the bold looks bold, the italics looks italicized, the button does, button. However, the button currently does nothing because we haven't added any JavaScript to it to do stuff yet, but it'll still be there. And then finally, here's that A tag, that link tag. So I've already clicked on the link, so it's going to turn purple for me. But if you guys do it on your computer, it should be blue, or it might be blue. Again, it's kind of like purplish, or maybe for you, blue hyperlink text we're all very familiar with. So I click on it, it'll turn it into the Purdue homepage. You guys can see as visited before. That's kind of demo 2. Are there any questions so far about HTML? How do you open code in your browser? Yeah, perfect. So actually, as our next thing to talk about that, if you have finished writing an HTML code and you saved it to a file called whatever.html, there are a few different ways to open it. The way we're going to go over for the first 3 weeks of this course is just opening it up in your web browser. So to do that, you're going to go to your File Explorer. Let me bring it over to my second slider here. Whoops, sorry about that. Make it a little bit smaller, so fit on this page a bit better. So you're going to go to the folder where the HTML files are. So for example, I have one here called demo1.html. It's the same file that we saw earlier from the VS Code. If it says .html, it's going to probably have an icon of a web browser next to it. I use Firefox, so mine is going to say Firefox, but your icon might be Chrome or Edge or some other web browser of your choice. If you double click it, for the first time pop-up, it may ask you if you want to open it, like where you want to open it with. Just choose any web browser if you haven't already. And we double click the file, it will automatically open in a web browser. So you can see here, here's the exact same demo 1 page we saw earlier. If I open up Explorer, I can open up demo 2. So we'll close this demo 2 out, and then open up demo 2, and you'll see it'll open up in my web browser. So if you want to open up the code, I was going to go over this after our checkpoint. You will just double click it in your File Explorer, and as a result, because of it, it will open up in a web browser. Are there any other questions so far? Okay, I don't see any. How is everyone doing? Do you guys maybe go slower? Is the pacing okay? Like, how do you guys feel about my pacing so far? Pace is okay. Doing well. All right, thank you. I like it. Perfect. So I'm going to try to keep it like not too in depth because HTML. I want to be real with you. Not too many people are writing HTML a whole lot anymore. They're really writing it. They're writing code using like a Squarespace style, like writing it on like a web browser, on a computer, or they're doing it like React or Angular or some other sort of JavaScript. We're going to go over HTML though because it is extremely important to understand how it works. Because, like I said, React uses HTML. everywhere. It's nothing but HTML. So even though in the industry, not too many people are using HTML by themselves, they do have to know how it works. Okay, so that is kind of the basics of HTML. With the tags I showed you guys, you will be able to write a lot of very powerful and very good looking web pages. Now, there are a few things to know. I didn't go over every HTML tag. There are a lot of HTML tags. There are a whole bunch of like images who have like listing, like listing tags, videos, some basic formatting tags. There's a lot of them. And we'll go over a couple of them, like the images tag specifically, with the JavaScript and the React a little bit more, and maybe list tags. I'm not 100% sure about that. But if you do want to know more about HTML, a list of every tag available, the website www.w3schools.com is a very good resource on a whole bunch of web development things. W3 is actually a short for World Wide Web Consortium. The WWW, the World Wide Web, has a group called the WWC, or the World Wide Web Consortium, that basically kind of like defines the standard of HTML. Because obviously, every browser, programmer, designer in the world has to have some kind of standard for how HTML should look and behave. And so the WWC, in W3 is shorthanded called, kind of defines a bunch of these standards. And W3 Schools is a unofficial like tutorial site that has the same name but is not related to the actual like group that defines the standard, but there's a whole bunch of very good tutorials on CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. And I will definitely promote their stuff because it's very good. Okay, checkpoint time. So what I want everyone to do is just to open up, if you haven't already, your your text editor of choice. And make a new folder, call it like, I don't know, Soccer Saturdays, Fall, Soccer Saturdays, so I come back in the spring, whatever you want to call it, make a new folder somewhere. And in that folder, try to write a basic HTML file that has as many heading tags, div tags, p tags, whatever you want to name it. And try to add a whole bunch of different kind of files, like the bolding, the italics, all that fun stuff, and links, especially links, to practice with all the HTML tags that we did before. If you have any questions about how to do that, you guys can put them in the chat. And if you're still unsure, again, we will be going into breakout rooms shortly after some CSS practice, where you guys can show it off with your companions, I guess, ask questions to one of the teaching staff, and a whole bunch of different stuff as well. So how we take about, it's currently at 4 o'clock Eastern time, so we'll say, take about 10 minutes. So we'll say at 4:10. Try to write a basic web page and then look at it in your browser. So again, look at your browser, you can just go to your File Explorer, click on it, and then it'll pop up in your web browser of choice. Here's a little hint for you guys. If you want to edit it in VS Code or some other text editor, you can change some code here, save it, and then go back to your web browser to refresh, and it'll automatically reload your pages. So for example, if I change this to lesson 1 demo 2 test, and I save this, and I go back to a web browser, it looks pretty normal here, but if I refresh it, the title you'll see that has already changed to match with the old HTML, the new HTML file look. So you guys can do that, just kind of have a quick way to check if it looks good. And here's one more really cool fact for you. Web browsers are very forgiving. So if you think you messed something up, just try it anyways. Because your web browser will try to fix stuff for you. It's going to automatically repair any broken HTML code that it might see. So why don't we get to 10 minutes? If any questions, put them in the chat. And if you still need some help afterwards, we will go over in the breakout rooms how to do in the breakout rooms for some more help. Okay, so I hope everyone had a chance to work on writing a basic HTML file. Again, if you're not comfortable, if you haven't finished yet, hold on to your questions. I'll put them in the chat here. I will try to get them answered as you can see them come across. Otherwise, we will go into breakout rooms after some CSS stuff. All right. Is everyone okay if we go on to CSS, or do people want a little bit more time to finish their HTML checkpoint 1? Yes, there are comments. Okay, so one thing about comments, let me quickly just go over that because I know one person asked about that. Let me pull up my VS Code. I forgot to add this in the slides, but yes, if you want to add comments to your HTML code, you are totally able to do that. The format's a little bit different. So you say one person needs a little bit more time. Yeah, take a little bit more time. If you want to add a comment, not too bad. It's really quick. It's you do a open angle brace, a exclamation point, and then with 2 hyphens. Yep. And then anything you type in between these 2 hyphens is called a comment, and it will not be shown by the web page. So here I can just give it to in that file. So if you want to add comments, you do is you go angle brace, exclamation point, hyphen, hyphen, and then a closing hyphen, hyphen, closing angle brace there, and that'll kind of like act as a comment. So if any other code like C or Java or Python, whatever you want to use, and if you go back to a web browser, you'll notice that you cannot see it anywhere inside the page. It's only for the programmer to actually look at. Okay. Yeah, I recommend commenting your code. I recommend commenting your code. Okay, how can I display HTML tags to a web page just as text? That's a tough one, actually. Actually, I don't know that one. I've never actually tried to have anyone do that before. But I would imagine there's some sort of some kind of escape tag you'd have to use. I'll look it up and get back to you in a second. And can you add it at the end of any line or before a line? This comment can be wherever you want it to be. The cool thing about HTML is HTML does not care where the tags are. So it can be in whatever order you want anywhere on the page. As long as it's in a valid HTML format, the comment can go before a line, after a line, on the same line even. You can put a comment in between these two if you wanted to. I could put a comment here if I wanted to. And it'll function as a valid HTML. So this is another. So again, HTML is really forgiving when it comes to where you put stuff like comments and different braces. Any other questions? Okay, so to add to your, the person who asked the question, how do you display HTML tags on the web page? It turns out you can't actually do it normally. What you would do is, if you see these little angle brackets, like less than or greater than signs, you would replace that with a actual HTML encoded symbol. So you would actually say something like, I'll put it down here, p tag. You would say like ampersand LT semicolon S, and then put an ampersand GT semicolon. That's standard data there. It's just called HTML encoding. It's kind of everywhere on the web. And yes, let's test it out to make sure. Then refresh our page. And you can see here it adds the tags right there. So yeah, you won't actually type the tags out. You kind of have to like encode them in a different format for the user. That makes sense. Yeah, HTML is kind of weird about that sometimes. So be careful with how you put that in code. So we'll misinterpret that if you do it incorrectly. All right. Second section for today. I know this is a 2-hour scheduled lecture, I'm looking at the time. We might not need the whole 2 hours. So we may be only about an hour and a half today, which isn't a problem. So yeah, this is not normal though. It's only because this is pretty basic HTML stuff. Next week and the following weeks, it may be a little bit longer. Okay, CSS, HTML5. Actually, HTML5 is what we covered. HTML5 is the standard. Not going to ask that. There have been multiple versions, 5 of them, you kind of guess from the name. 5 has been adopted since like the mid-2010s, I believe. And it's pretty much standard everywhere. So all the code I'm going to teach you is valid, is HTML5. If you want to write HTML4 or earlier, there are some minor changes you do have to make. But a lot of the tags like div, p, h, by, whatever, are also still valid HTML4, 32, and 1 tags. But we won't go into those because they're very old standards that basically not many people use nowadays. So all the code I show you will be HTML5. That helps you search a little bit. CSS time. Okay, so I mentioned CSS earlier, the way to format and style HTML tags and the web pages. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And it's basically a way to describe how to style an HTML tag. It makes formatting simple and easy to read. The cascading part comes from the fact that you can have multiple CSS files and multiple properties for each HTML tag in a single web page. So like any modern website like google.com or like Facebook or Reddit or Instagram or Twitter or Wikipedia will have like probably at least 3 or 4 CSS files somewhere on that page, because every file might do a little bit of a different thing. It's also good practice to have them be split up so you can like reuse the code in multiple different places if possible. How do we use CSS? So in CSS, the way we'd use it is you tell it first what kind of tag or what kind of group you want to apply a bunch of properties to, and then you basically tell it what properties apply to that group. And that's kind of why CSS is so powerful, is because you can like say you can make a P tag and an H1 tag look the same. Even though they have very different looks to us normally, we can make them look very similar. So in CSS, we can either change every tag of a certain HTML tag type. So every P tag looks the same, or every H3 tag is the same, or every, I don't know, body tag is the same formatting. Or you can use classes and IDs. This is probably where people get tripped up the most about CSS. And I'll go over where to be careful, the common pitfalls in a couple of slides. But definitely be very mindful of a CSS class versus a CSS or a HTML class versus an HTML ID. Because if you do misuse them, your code may break and it may take a long time to figure out why. I know I personally have had times where I used the wrong one and it takes like an hour to figure out why I mistyped something the wrong way. So the same as syntax. So I'll show you example files, of course, before we do anything fancy. So basically, you choose the name of the group you want to change the style of. It's not Greek grammar, but it's the idea. An open bracket, a bunch of formatting code, and then closing bracket. So it's kind of similar to like a Java, C, C#, or those kind of languages that have like the bracket-based syntax, if you're familiar with those. So here's a basic formatting options I mentioned earlier. There are a lot of them. Again, there are a lot, and we won't go over a lot of them because there's way too many to go over. But the basic ones that basically everyone's going to use eventually is color, font size, font family, text align, and background color. So as a future reference, this might not be super apparent. If the font changes inside of the actual slides, if the font goes to a what's called like a monospace, looking like where a code kind of looking like console kind of fonts, that's an actual code, whether it be HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or whatever. If it has this kind of like monospace, blocky kind of like style, that's code. For color, color is the color of the text. You will definitely use this tag somewhere. whether to make it like your text like a different color, or just to make like something highlight or pop a bit more, you will definitely use the color tag. Font size, change the font size, pretty explanatory. Font family. This is a little bit more tricky. So a font family is basically the fonts the web browser will render your web page in, kind of like a font like a word processing like Word or Google Drive or something like that. The reason I call it a family is because there's HTML may be a standard, but it's not a completely adhered to standard. Sometimes some like software developers use like bizarre fonts. They might use like specialty custom fonts or like non-standard stuff, or like web browsers may not have the proper font installed or whatever it may be. Font family, you give it a list of all the possible fonts you want it to look like. So maybe you want it to be like Times New Roman, and then like, I don't know, like German, something like that. And then if you have like some kind of random serif font. Or maybe you want like Helvetica or Arial and then some random sans serif font. So you can kind of define like in the order of priority, which fonts you want it to look like first. It's always good practice to have multiple possible fonts in the fonts family, because it's very possible that a phone, like a person's web browser, computer, phone, whatever, might not have the font you want installed. So always have multiple different options for that user. Then text align. This aligns the text. It can be left, right, center, or justified, kind of like a web processing. And then finally, background color. Obviously, change the background color. Not too complicated. Easy. So here are some examples of the different groups of HTML syntaxes. So the first example I gave was changing every single HTML tag of a certain type. So if you guys can see that here, this little div tag, I have some random div, some paragraph text, and on the left I have on the right I have the accompanying CSS code. So the way you're going to have this look proper, my apologies, is you will have the name of the CSS tag, so in this case div, an opening curly brace, a closing curly brace, and in between these two curly braces, all of the font and color choices and CSS styles you want. So color is black. Makes sense. This means that for every piece of text in between this div tags, the color will be changed to black. You pick whatever color you want, so black, a lot of the standards are black, blue, yellow, light purple, whatever it may be. Sorry. You can also give it like hex code. So you can say like hashtag FFFFFF or like A053B7, I don't know, whatever color that be. That's for color, font color. Next is font size. As you can see, it defines the font size. In HTML and the web browser, and any kind of web browsing defined software, size, specifically font size or like image size, is defined in terms of pixels. How many pixels the user has on their screen. So whereas in a word processor like Word or Google Docs, you might have it in terms of points like PT. That is for printing. Pixels are for displaying on the screen, so we use px. But 20px is 20 pixels. That's it's not a good equivalent, but I would say it's 20 pixels is probably similar to like maybe like an 18 or 20 point font. But again, it can change depending upon like the size of the screen, how many pixels it makes a web browser. It's a whole different thing. So definitely try out a few values and make sure it looks good. Next is a CSS class. So group 2, which is classes of CSS, like HTML classes. The way to do that is inside of that HTML tag, let's kind of recall back about 5 or 6 slides to when we did the A link tags, the A tags with hyperlinks. We put A space href equals, and then in quotes the name of the link you want to go to. It's a little similar to that, except we put class equals in quotes in the name of the HTML class. This class is not only used for CSS, but also in other things like JavaScript as well. So we will definitely be using classes quite a bit in both JavaScript and ReactJS. To actually modify the class, you do a period in the name of the class. So here's a quick reference guide for you to recap. If there's nothing, is the kind of name here before the curly brace, that modifies all HTML, all HTML elements with that tag. If you have a dot, it's a class, so every element with the class equals matching that, changes to this, and then we'll go to the third one in a second. So same thing, color black and font size. The reason we do this class, maybe we have two divs. We have one div here and then another div below it for something else. We only want to change the first div. So we can say a class to only modify certain parts of HTML code. We have to modify every div we did before on this example. If we had two divs, they would both have the exact same formatting. But if we have this class-based div, we only modify the div with the class equals and then the name of this class. And then third is CSS Ids. So we're group 3 is Ids. So again, kind of like div space ID and then the name of the ID here. And in the CSS, you do hashtag the name of the ID right there. So what is a class versus an ID? And I mentioned that's a very common pitfall to be careful of. IDs are kind of like IDs in the real world. You can only have one tag with an ID, any given ID. So for example, I use the ID test here. If this is part of a larger HTML document, in the entire document, no other tag, div or not, could have an ID of test. If you do, your code will definitely throw an error, it might not render properly, that stuff can happen. So you can only have one ID per HTML file. However, I can have multiple IDs. So maybe I have an ID of like test1 or test2. As long as only one HTML element has an ID equals quotes test1 and then the corresponding entry in the CSS file on the right here, that's okay. But I cannot have two things with the ID of test. Conversely, in class land, you can have as many or as little classes as you want. So you can have a whole bunch of like classes, you can have everything be a class, nothing be a class, only like certain things be a class, whatever it may be. Just be careful of that though, because it's oftentimes very common for people to use a class when they meant ID or ID when they meant class. And again, if you reuse IDs, your code may not function properly, which is very, very bad. Are there any questions so far about like groupings of CSS like tags? No. Okay. Yes, question. What's up? Why use IDs? Yeah. So a very common type when you might want to use an ID is maybe, for example, you have like a very specific part of your page that has a little bit different from everything else. So ID is a little bit trickier. Before they were used a lot more often. Nowadays, not so much. But like an old example might be you have like a navigation bar at the very top of your web page. You want to make sure that that bar looks the same in every page you use. So you define an ID and you give that bar the ID so that it'll look the same across page to page to page. And also said no other element can be called a nav bar, for example, so downloads can clearly have in the background. Nowadays, however, IDs are kind of, they're still very popular, but also more commonly used classes, and be very careful with the class naming schemes. But we go over them because you'll still see them in the industry quite a bit. I, for example, use IDs. I use IDs all the time because, again, it does make sure you're keeping parts of your web page separate and unique so that things look the same across page to page. Okay, demo number 3. This will be our last demo for today. We'll close out demo 2. I'll open up these two files. So I have here demo3, and then the corresponding CSS file. So CSS is in a .css file, as you guys can see here. The file name does not matter. I just chose demo3 to group it easier so I can see it. However, in the actual practice, call it whatever you want to call it. I recommend some kind of naming convention so you can remember what they are supposed to be though. A very common one is like stylesheet.css or style.css. But again, it can be whatever you guys may want it to be. So we'll go back to my demo3 page here. Now I'm going to walk through this a little bit more slowly because there are some very key things to note here. First things first, Doctype Html. That was kind of like that same thing from last time, so that should be kind of familiar. The HTML tag here should look familiar. Head tag here looks familiar. But there's a new element in this head tag. So we see here we have a title, lesson 1 demo 3. We also have this link tag. So there are two kinds of what's called a link tag. There's like the hyperlink, the hyperlink tag we talked about earlier, and the actual link tag. This link tag is only used by the web browser. Now, probably you can't see it. Sorry, used by the web browser to link different files together. So if you ever take like a C programming class like ECE264, it's kind of like with linking the compiler, if you're kind of familiar with what that does. It combines multiple files together for one single output. So there are two things you need to have inside of the link command. The link command has only a few things to use it for, mainly CSS and JavaScript, but we'll go over this picture because it's very important. The first thing is rel. So rel defines what the actual file you're pointing to or linking to is. Some examples are style sheet for CSS files, text/JavaScript for like code files, a bunch of different stuff. But the main two of those are JavaScript and CSS. So we mostly just use it for CSS, but you can use it for whatever you want to use it for. And finally, Href. Href kind of similar to the A tag, where the Href equals the link you want to point to in the Href tag. This could either be the name of like a hyperlink or like a pointer to some other site on your computer. You'll notice here I don't have an HTTP or like a drive path. By default, again, it's kind of smart, by default, when you load an HTML page, your web browser will look in the same folder for a file by the name of whatever, demo, in this case, demo3.css. If I put it in a different folder, I would have to define what that folder was here instead. But because it's in the same folder, it's in the same, fall web dev folder, I would just put it as demo3.css. And then finally, you have a header tag and some div and p tags. Nothing too complicated there. But notice here, I have some div tags. So this is first div here. I gave it the class of class example. And again, remember, classes can be reused anywhere you want to. So for example, down here, I also gave my third div tag, which is completely separated from the first div, another class example, which means that all the p tags in between these two divs, so these two tags and these two tags, will follow the styling defined by this class. Next is ID, and again, ID is just a singular, only one item can have an ID tag. So my ID example. Next, we're going to go over to quickly our demo file here, just to double check the CSS. So this first one is an HTML group tag. Every H1 tag on my page will look the same, and it will have the color blue. Next is the classes. So here I changed the classes. Again, it's a dot for class, hashtag for IDs. I changed the fonts to 18 and the font family to some sans serif font or Helvetica. Here's where I was kind of mentioning to have multiple fonts in your font family. Helvetica, while a very popular font on the web, may not be included on every web browser, every phone, device, laptop, you name it. It's always good to have a backup font. One backup font that you can be 100% guaranteed to work every single time, no matter what, is sans serif or serif. So sans serif is kind of like a smooth looking font, like your modern web looking fonts, and serif is kind of like a classic Times New Roman text printed out kind of looking font. For web dev, sans serif looks best, but if you want, serif also works just as well. But again, those two must always exist on the computer. So even if Helvetica doesn't exist, you can be guaranteed that sans serif will exist. And we change the font size to 18 pixels, so it's going to be a little bit larger than normal. And then from the ID, we change the thing to be center aligned, so text line is centered here. And the background color will be yellow-green. It's ugly looking yellow-green. You can kind of see it on the hover over here. So if I load up my page in my web browser, clicking at it normally, excuse me, you will see the fancy styled looking CSS page. So our H1 tag, the big header tag I mentioned earlier, now has a blue coloring to it. And the two div tags look the same. They both have a larger font size than this normal small font, and they are sans serif. They look more modern, more fluid, more web style. It's actually been proven, I think, by some studies somewhere that on a screen, like some kind of e-screen, having a sans serif font makes reading easier. Whereas when you're printing, having a serif font like Times New Roman makes reading easier. So keep that in mind when designing stuff. And then finally, that middle P tag, middle div, those two lines of text. The colors are that weird yellow-green, and the text is center aligned. I'll get an overview of the basics of CSS. Again, there are a lot more properties you guys can go into if you want to on your own time. We went over the basics, like there are underlines, borders, width and height changing, margins, padding, spacing, you name it, a whole bunch. Shadows even. We only went over like the most basic ones. We won't go over a lot of them because they're not relevant to us. But if you do want to know more, again, W3 Schools has a great CSS reference guide you can definitely use if you want it. So, are there any immediate questions about CSS or HTML you want me to quickly answer for everybody? Okay, I clearly don't see any. All right, so we'll go over our project demo. So again, if you were not here, was it used, or can you type most anything? Yes, so there are some predefined colors, like the basic ones, like black, yellow, green, red, blue, purple, green, white, yellow, orange, pale green, light blue, stuff like that. But if you want to be a little bit more specific about it, you can always define your own color by just kind of going to your web browser. I'm looking at your tab here. Look up HTML color, pick your favorite, you look on Google. And you'll get this nice little looking fancy thing here. So you can kind of move this around, find the exact name, a nice little light blue, the exact color you want. Once you find the exact color you want, find the hex value here, copy the entire thing, including the hashtag, and just paste it. So change this to that. And it'll change the color to whatever the hex value is. Let's save. And I'll go back to my demo and refresh. You'll see that the H1 tag changed color. Yes, I saw. Thank you again. If you don't want to do that in VS Code, look at my color box next to it. Click on this. You can actually choose a color from here as well. So maybe you want to be a little bit fancy. You want to go, I don't know, some transparent like green if you want. Maybe. You can just do from here as well if you prefer. So yeah, you can either do it from VS Code, kind of hovering over the color, and like choosing it from this color picker here, or look it up on Google. There are a lot of examples of different color pickers you can have. I hope it answers your question. All right, final project demo. All right, so if you were not here last week in our info session, let me pull up our project demo. So like I said, to earn like the final certificate, you will have to finish a project demo and the final project. This year, the final product is a Pokédex style like Pokemon like searching application. So here's an example. Here's actually a more advanced example of one. Yours will not be this advanced. I will probably make like a simpler one to show off in class. But if you want to go for the advanced certification, you can use this instead. This we consider the advanced certification. So I can click on stuff like it loads these Pokemon. I can view more if I want to. It'll kind of load them in. It'll kind of load those. So be careful. You can like search for Pokemon. So you want to search for Piplup. I can search for him and it'll kind of pop up here. Or we can like read more about Bulbasaur, so you can read more and get all this kind of information. Yours will not be this fully fledged. This took a little while to work on. So yours is a bit more basic, but as long as you have something where you can like display pictures of Pokemon, you're good. And again, I'll try to download this more often to get closer to the product, as well. All right, breakout room time. So I'm going to break out people. I'm going to stop sharing and put people in the breakout rooms. Please be very helpful in this time. I've never done this before in online settings, so things might not work perfectly the first time. So give me some feedback in a second. In the breakout rooms, we're going to work on adding CSS to the website you made earlier. If you want to improve it or ask questions about that, you can do so in the breakout rooms. Or you could make a more complicated website from scratch with some CSS. So basically the checkpoint to it is adding CSS to practice CSS, basically. Before I do that, I have two things I want to mention. Feedback. If you guys could, please fill out the feedback. The form is here and on the slides as well in the Slack. Fill this out. Let us know what we did well, what we can improve upon, the normal works. 7:30 today. This helps us improve for future sessions, so the more feedback we get, the better we can help everybody. And the last thing, any questions? If you have questions, ask us in your breakout rooms or on Slack, we'll be watching those too, or come to our review hours. I will send this out in the Slack as well. But basically, we will have review hours every week, Thursdays from 6 to 8 p.m. I'll put the link to WebEx to WebEx call in the chat every week. But please tell me if you have any questions at any time. What software do you personally prefer? So I personally prefer using VS Code. I find it to be the cleanest one I've used so far. But obviously, people have their own opinion. Atom also very popular or stuff like that. But yeah, I prefer VS Code. But whatever works for you is best. What I like, it doesn't matter for you. All right. That's the end of my presentation. Let me stop sharing my screen. All right, and I'm going to stop the recording. Give me a second.